Our yard is small, fenced with a wooden fence. Everything is visible from the window, and I got used to considering this safe freedom. I taught my son to feel boundaries, while I allowed myself to relax. That evening, I poured a cup of tea, turned on the news, and thought the day had ended well. The announcer spoke about evening traffic jams and a warm front, then suddenly switched to breaking news. A photograph of a child in a red sweater with a smiling whale appeared on the screen. It was our sweater, a favorite, because Oliver once said the whale looked like a happy drop of the sea. The announcer reported that the child had been hit by a car at an intersection, and now the police were looking for witnesses. Everything inside me went cold. I flew barefoot into the yard. The ball lay lonely in the grass. The laughter had vanished. The sun seemed to have hidden too. Our neighbor Clara stood by the gate with a phone in her trembling fingers, not daring to lift her eyes. I asked one single question, and my voice sounded alien. After her silent nod, everything turned into a blur of sirens, lights, cold stretchers. The hospital greeted me with the sharp smell of antiseptic. The clock on the wall showed almost midnight when the doctor came out to me. He spoke quietly, as if every word could shatter fragile reality. I understood only one thing. My son was alive, but his condition was critical. The night dissolved in the hum of machinery. I sat at his bedside, holding his hand, once warm and grasping, now fragile and pale. The monitor displayed his heart line, each peak ringing like a bell. I was afraid to blink, afraid that something might change in that very instant. I told him about summer, about the salty water, about the sand we collected in a jar to remember the sea in winter. I begged forgiveness for every minute I prioritized work over a walk, for that cup of tea that cost a lifetime. When the nurse asked me to leave, I stood behind the glass door and watched the doctors bend over his tiny body. The hallway was long, empty. Only the tea machine in the corner hummed monotonously. The phone rang endlessly. Relatives, colleagues, journalists. I couldn't share my grief with words. Once I finally answered. A woman, her voice trembling, said she had witnessed the accident. The driver had run the red light at the intersection and then fled. Her words cut like a knife, and suddenly fury flared within me. I realized that pain hadn't killed all my feelings. Fury burned like fire among ruins. The days blended together, as if someone had pressed a rewind button. Doctors spoke of hours that would decide his fate, of a complex operation. I caught their glances, searching for even a speck of confidence. They responded reservedly, but hope lived in their eyes. I clung to it like a drowning person to a board. I made up fairy tales aloud to avoid silence. In one tale, the whale from his sweater came alive, turned into a ship, and carried the boy home to where the sun was always warm, and his mother never turned away. Every sunrise in the ward was like the last. A narrow strip of sky outside the window turned pink, and I whispered that a new day meant a new attempt. I promised him the sea, where real whales sing underwater, and we would listen to them together. I was ready to believe anything just for him to open his eyes and say his favorite, "Mom, look." Now, as I write these lines beside his bed, the monitor still flickers green, and my hand warms his. I don't know how this story will end. I only know that every second is worth an eternity. And somewhere out there, beyond the hospital walls, police are searching for the person who ran the red light and hid in the darkness. I don't know how much time passed before the operating room door opened again. It felt like I had merged with that gray chair in the hallway, with that background of muffled footsteps and quiet doctors' conversations. The world had shrunk to one movement. As soon as the door creaked open, everything would change, or collapse. When the surgeon finally emerged, I stood up too abruptly, and my head spun. He approached slowly, and I tried to read the expression on his face even before he spoke. He said the operation went as they had hoped, that now everything depended on rehabilitation, on time, and on how strong my boy would prove to be. I listened, and everything inside me trembled, with relief, with fear, with emotions too intense to put into words. I returned to the ward. He had already been moved, connected to new machines. His lips were slightly parted, and his breathing was now more even. The doctor said it was a good sign. I just sat and watched him, as if I were afraid that if I blinked, everything would disappear. Sometimes I placed my hand on his chest to make sure it was rising. In those moments, I felt alive again. A day later, he wiggled his fingers. I immediately called the doctor. Then he opened his eyes slightly, but his gaze was hazy, as if he was still somewhere in between. He didn't recognize me, and I didn't know what was scarier, waiting for him to wake up or looking into the eyes of a child who remembered nothing yet. I started simply showing him toys, photographs, whispering his name, calling him as I used to, at the very moment he would run with the ball to me in the yard. And one day, he looked at me and whispered, "Mom." I didn't believe it at first. It felt like a sound from my memory, not from his mouth. But he repeated it a little louder, and I couldn't hold back my tears. It was a short word, but it contained everything: my life, his return, our shared story that hadn't ended. All this time I thought, why did I even turn on the TV that evening? Why didn't I go out into the yard myself? Go over, call out to him? Am I to blame for believing in safety, in familiarity? We tell ourselves so many times, it's just a couple of minutes. But the truth is, it's precisely in those minutes that anything can happen. I don't know what will happen to the person who hit my son. They found him. He was hiding with acquaintances in another city. He said he was scared, that he didn't understand what happened. I heard this many times, from lawyers, from police officers. They say he regrets it. Well, maybe he does. But I still remember those seconds every night when his car simply disappeared around the corner, and my boy was left lying on the asphalt. I don't want revenge, and I don't expect the court to give me solace. I just want no one, ever, to call this just an accident. It's not an accident. It's a chain of decisions. It's the choice to get behind the wheel, to run a red light, not to stop. It's a choice behind which stands a mother clutching her son's cooling fingers. After discharge, a long rehabilitation awaited us. We learned anew to hold a spoon, recognize colors, distinguish faces. Sometimes he laughed, and sometimes he cried, as if he felt something for which there were no words. I was by his side every minute. The word work disappeared from my life. Money ran out, bills grew, but I didn't complain. We lived in the present, and every mom look was like a new breath for me. Now, months later, he runs again, still carefully, still with a look in his eyes that holds anxiety. But he's alive. He wakes up in the morning and asks if the sun will shine today. He says he's afraid of big cars. And I don't tell him that I myself flinch every time I hear the screech of brakes outside the window. We are silent about it. We just hold each other. I'm writing all this because I want someone else to hear it, so that at least one mother pouring evening tea might suddenly think, shouldn't I look out into the yard? So that one driver slows down for a second, even if they're in a hurry, because sometimes a second is all that stands between life and silence. Sometimes I think, what if I had simply forgotten to turn on the television that evening? What if I hadn't heard that news report? I could have lived a few more minutes in blissful ignorance. Perhaps I would have put the kettle on the stove, opened the window, and suddenly called out into the yard, "Oliver, time to come home." And then he wouldn't have gone outside, wouldn't have run after that ball, wouldn't have been in that place where the car appeared out of nowhere. But everything happened exactly as it did. And now every day of mine is divided into before and after. I no longer take safety for granted. Now, when I walk down the street and see a child running ahead with a parent slightly behind, everything inside me tightens. I want to call out, to stop them, to warn them, even if it's a stranger's child. Because in these months, I've understood there are no strangers' children. All of them can end up on that strip of asphalt where someone failed to hit the brakes. Many people, when they hear our story, say, I was lucky, that he survived, that everything could have ended differently. Yes, I know, but every time I hear the word lucky, a wave rises inside me. Because it wasn't about luck. It was about long weeks of struggle, about the blue circles under the doctor's eyes, about trembling hands that signed papers, not knowing how the night would end. It was about the strength that appears only when you stand at the edge and still move forward. After his discharge, we returned home as if to a stranger's apartment. Oliver's room remained exactly as it was that evening. Toys on the shelves, a book open in the middle, a blanket tossed at the foot of the bed. I stood at the threshold, and suddenly it all came flooding back, as if this room remembered what I didn't want to remember. I stepped inside, walked to the window overlooking our yard, and I imagined how everything could have been if he hadn't come back. The first nights at home were difficult. He woke up in tears, called me, grabbed my hand, begged me not to leave, and I had no intention of leaving. I slept beside him, listening to him breathe, counting his breaths. On the wall, we hung a paper whale, the very one from his favorite sweater. It became our talisman. Every morning, I looked at it and reminded myself, today is another day given to us. One day, a man came to us, young, bewildered, not knowing how to act. It was the driver's brother. He brought a letter. There were no excuses in it, no pleas for forgiveness. There were only words about how his brother had been silent since he learned the child had survived, how he opens and closes the front door every day but doesn't go out, how he hasn't forgiven himself. I read it and didn't know what to feel. I didn't know what to do with this stranger's pain. It didn't heal mine, but perhaps it helped, if only a little, not to hate. I thought for a long time whether to write a reply, and then I sat down and wrote that we haven't forgotten, that we are hurting, but that perhaps someday Oliver himself will decide if he wants to speak with the person who so changed his life, and that I won't decide for him. We continued to live, slowly, as if learning anew. He went back to school, but now with his mom by his side. I sat on the bench in the yard while he played, this time under my watchful eye. He became more cautious, quieter. Sometimes I caught something in his eyes that wasn't there before, as if he, too, had understood something, more than a child should understand. Sometimes in the evenings, he would suddenly fall silent and look out the window. One day he asked, "Mom, why did I go for the ball then and not wait for you?" I didn't know what to answer. I just hugged him, because he shouldn't have to ask about that. He's not to blame. No one should have made him feel guilty for simply being a child. Since then, I often think that adults should be a shield. We are obligated to be faster, more attentive, more foresightful. We must notice when someone tired gets behind the wheel. We must remind them that traffic rules are not about fines. They are about lives, about those who wait at home, about those who might not return. I tell this story not because I want sympathy, but because if someone hears it and stops and thinks and chooses differently, then it was not in vain. Recently, Oliver and I went to the city park. The warm sun gently rested on our shoulders, and the air carried a sweet scent of dust and blooming grasses. He walked half a step ahead, and I as I'd grown accustomed to after the accident, stayed close not to restrict his freedom, but so he would constantly feel my presence and understand that he had a reliable support beside him. On the path, little ones were flying kites, and one large orange dragon got tangled in the branches of an old maple. The boy holding the reel burst into tears, and his mom immediately hugged him, trying to comfort him. I watched them, and deep inside, a familiar ache arose. For once I had similarly assured my child that a lost toy was nothing, and the world around was entirely under control. Oliver came up to me and whispered, asking if I had been scared then, on that terrible night. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady, and after a short pause, he said he had heard everything. My fairy tale about the whale, the rustle of the medic's hurried steps, my sobs through the silence of the intensive care unit. In that moment, it became clear to me that my son had helped me hold on just as much as I had him. We were returning to life together, mutually supporting each other. Even when one of us was silent, we continue to live, although this life will never be the same. I'm not consumed by constant anxiety, but vigilance has become my second nature. I notice those who stand on the roadside and hesitate, drivers distracted by phone screens, and I'm always ready to stop, ask a question, exchange a glance. Every morning I thank my son for being by my side, and in return, I hear his quiet, "I'm glad to," and that simple acknowledgement sounds louder to me than any celebration. On the wall of our bedroom, framed, hangs the paper whale we cut out during his hospital days. It has become a symbol of our return. Sometimes in the evenings, I draw almost childlike pictures, always featuring the sea, and in its depths, our kind giant swims confidently forward, as if knowing a secret path back from the deepest darkness. I can't precisely explain why I chose a whale, but I feel it embodies care, strength, and the ability to rise from incredible depths. Before bed, I often lie beside Oliver and listen to his calm, even breathing like the rhythmic tide. Closing my eyes, I mentally return to that summer evening, not to relive the horror, but to remember every minute spent together is a priceless gift, easily lost if one believes in the illusion of absolute safety. I tell my story because somewhere right now, a mother is putting on a kettle and a child is playing in the yard, and she feels that everything is under control. However, it takes only a single wrong move, an elusive flash of headlights, or a sudden news alert for the familiar reality to cease to exist. If time could be turned back, I would simply look out the window, call my son's name, hug him, and hold him for just one more second. That would have changed everything. May your family never know the sound of an ambulance siren blaring from the television instead of the usual evening news, and may your children forever remain in the warm embraces of their parents, not on cold screens. Cherish those you love, and don't postpone your attention, for tragedy often begins with the most ordinary trifle that seems unworthy of concern.